Shalom, I'm Rabbi Joseph Potasnik, and welcome to Faith to Faith. No matter what our differences may be, it is our faith that hopefully brings us together to do great things. My guest today follows in the footsteps of the greatest Jewish scholar and philosopher, Moses Maimonides, as he is both a rabbi and a physician with an active practice in gastroenterology. Rabbi Elie Abadie, MD, comes from a long and distinguished rabbinical lineage dating back to 15th century Spain and Provence. Born in Beirut, Lebanon, he grew up in Mexico City, came to the United States to attend Yeshiva University. He is the founding rabbi and spiritual leader of the Edmond J Safra Synagogue, the head of school of the Sephardic Academy, and the spiritual leader of Moses Safra Community Center, all based in Manhattan. He is also the director of the Jacob E. Safra Institute of Sephardic Studies at Yeshiva University, and is a scholar and college lecturer of Sephardic Judaism, history, philosophy, and comparative traditional law. As co-president of Justice for Jews from Arab Countries, he was instrumental in passing a U.S. government congressional resolution dealing with the issue of Middle Eastern refugees. In recognition of his service, Rabbi Abadie also received the Orden del Mérito Civil, the highest civil decoration given by His Majesty King Juan Carlos I of Spain. Welcome, Rabbi Dr. Abadie. I can only tell you after that introduction, we've come to the end of the program.
I'm sure.
Right? So a lot of credentials that you have. I hope I did some justice to the Spanish phrases there. Let me ask you this. Obviously, you didn't complete the cycle. You didn't become a lawyer. You just went for the rabbinate and for medicine. Why both?
Because I wanted to really follow in the footsteps of the great Sephardic sages and actually of the great Jewish sages. As you know, even from the time of the Talmud, the great sages had a profession to service to mankind and had the rabbinate as the service to God. And I wanted to follow in their footsteps and in a sense renew that era of the golden age of Spain.
So I ask you, there you are presiding over some religious ceremony and you have a beeper that goes off. Emergency somewhere. What do you do?
That is correct. It has happened, not a lot, but it has happened. My congregants understand that very well, as much as my patients understand that sometimes I may get a rabbinic emergency while I am taking care of them.
So could this happen in the midst of a wedding, or do you always have to bring an associate with you just in case?
It could happen. Usually if there is a medical emergency, the first step is to go to the emergency room. So that gives me a leeway of at least 15, 20 minutes to a half hour before I get there.
All right, talk about Safra. You know, people see the name prominently inscribed on the entrance to the synagogue, on other institutions. Who were the Safra family?
Well, it began really with Mr. Jacob Safra in Syria, a philanthropist who began his banking enterprise, and then that was transmitted to the children. The oldest at that time in charge was Edmond Safra of blessed memory, who really developed that banking industry greatly, made it international throughout all the 5 continents. And he was a person who, somebody very rare in the world, philanthropist, understanding, down to earth, compassionate, someone that anybody who has had anything to do with him will testify to his great personality.
Interesting, we often speak of money as a means to something else. It's not the end in and of itself. I know there are some people who pursue a livelihood, and that is the end of the story for the individual, but there are others, like you mentioned, the Safra tradition of working and doing for others. It's a great synthesis, and I think Jewish tradition favors that approach, obviously, because at the end of all of it, it's what you do with your hands. It's not just how much you take, it's also how much you give.
That is correct. He never saw money as the end, but he saw the money as the mean to help others. And that is even after his death, as he established the foundation, the philanthropic foundation, that after his passing, that money will be distributed properly to the people in need, to institutions, to philanthropic causes.
Talk about the Sephardic model, the Sephardic community. I mean, we as Ashkenazim, I don't think we spend enough time learning about other traditions and other communities. And for a while, you know, there was a rift, Ashkenazic, Sephardic. I think we've seen the bridging of some of that. But what does it mean today when you're part of the Sephardic community? What are the responsibilities? What are the the traditions that you receive?
Yeah, well, you know, the separation between Ashkenazim and Sephardim is an accident of history, is a geographic location, but that geography really meant a lot to the ethos of each group. Living under Islam and under more open society at that time, ironically, afforded the Sephardim a more greater worldview, if I can say, a wider worldview, worldview that allowed them to see other cultures, intermingle with other cultures in a relatively peaceful manner. And that really changed their worldview. And so therefore, for me today, to be a Sephardi is to be somebody who sees the world not just from the perspective of the Jewish people, but of the perspective of humanity in general.
Now, you spent some of your life in Syria, am I correct?
In Lebanon.
In Lebanon, rather.
My parents were from Syria.
Yeah.
That's correct.
And you've gone back?
We wanted to go back. We had a trip all planned, and at that moment, the war in Syria had begun that month, and so we had to postpone it.
When's the last time you were there?
When I left,
Really?
1971. Well, actually, I could say I was in northern Israel, put a foot in Lebanon territory for a second, and yes, but that was in the 80s and in the 90s.
Any Jews left in these areas?
In Lebanon, we don't know the exact amount. I would say a handful, no more than that. In Syria, counting to be 14 to 16 people in Damascus, nowhere else.
I remember some years ago, Mike Wallace did a program on Syria. And he said Jews were living there freely. And it was pointed out to him, freely. You have to have a special ID if you're Jewish to travel anywhere in Syria. It wasn't as good as he tried to portray it. These families who live there, they openly identify as Jews, or they have to live more of a hidden kind of lifestyle?
Well, they do not flaunt their Judaism, but they did live Jewishly. They were permitted to worship their religion and their faith. However, the transportation and also movement, that was severely curtailed. If they needed to have some business with another city, they needed a permit to be able to travel to that other city. But within the enclave of their community, they had the freedom of religion in a sense, and the freedom of association. Of course, there was always a fear that somebody from the government is watching them.
Is there an open synagogue?
Now there's only one synagogue that they can barely get a minyan because there are only 14, 15 people.
And in Lebanon?
In Lebanon, there is nothing officially organized. They just renovated the main synagogue, the Magen Avraham. I understand, I have seen pictures, beautifully renovated, but I think it's a shell without a soul.
So it's maybe done as a PR kind of gesture. I mean, to renovate a synagogue is very nice, but when you don't have the minyan, so...
That's correct.
Right.
I think it was a recognition of the Lebanese government and the Lebanese people that there was a Jewish presence in Lebanon, and they wanted kind of relive that presence with just a symbol of that culture.
An Ashkenazi person walking into a service, Sephardic service, Shabbat morning, would see things that he or she may not identify with in the Ashkenazic setting. Give us some of those differences.
Well, the text is, I would say, 95% the same. The melodies, however, are different, and the way it is chanted is different. In the Sephardic rite, we have the Hazan, the cantor, who practically recites the entire prayers out loud so people can follow him. Where in an Ashkenazi service, as you know, the cantor only recites the first verse and the last verse of each paragraph. Now, we have that system because what's known as tefillah betzibur, prayer in public, which means the entire public prays together. And the cantor is a representative of the public, and as he recites it loud, the entire congregation joins. I believe that the Ashkenazi difference came about because of the fear of repression and oppression in their countries, where if they would have prayed out loud, the non-Jewish neighbors would have heard them, and therefore they would have identified them, and so therefore they probably kept it quiet for that reason.
The Torah, vertical. Why?
Well, that's because, again, for climatological reasons, I believe. As you know, Sephardim lived in very, very arid, hot area where they needed certain cases to protect the parchment and the letters. And a wooden a wooden case would be very, very helpful to maintain the integrity of the parchment. And where in Ashkenazi, living in very cold places, a cloth was a better one to protect.
So when you're reading the Torah, Sephardic Synagogue on a Shabbat morning, it's vertical?
That's correct.
Right? Which is something we never see in the
Well, that's correct. I would say, Sephardim always stand tall.
Marriages between Ashkenazim and Sephardim, how is that viewed? Some look upon that as saying, well, would not be my preference, but still part of the family.
Well, I think decades ago, from both parts, it was seen with a frown because people felt we don't know that person, we don't know the family. Who are they? What are they? What do they represent? But as the two diasporas have been commingling now for decades in Israel, in the United States, and everywhere in the world, that fear, that barrier has been broken. My own wife is Ashkenazi, and we have a wonderful marriage, home, and children. And more people are intermarried, if we could call that.
Yeah.
Call that.
So
and there's one more thing I could say is that nowadays we understand each other. We are neighbors, and we know who we are. And so therefore those barriers have really completely broken. Except some people still believe that they want somebody that is from the same community only because they don't want any changes in customs and traditions and things like that.
So how does it work in terms of the children? Do they see themselves, for example, in your family, Sephardic, Ashkenazic, a little of both, a synthesis?
Well, I believe it's the best of both worlds.
Right.
They see themselves as a synthesis. There's always usually one more dominant than the other.
Right.
Understandingly, my son-in-law, who is Ashkenaz, in a very humorous way, he says, well, the question is, who do you go according, right? The husband or the wife? So he says, you go according to who is Sephardi.
There is this sense, and I've watched this over the years in the Sephardic community, and I think it's a great paradigm for other groups. Cohesive community, reaching out to others in need. Another Sephardic Jew needs some help. He or she knows the Sephardic community will be there to respond with as much as possible. A building needs to go up for a Sephardic community center. Community rallies together. I saw this in Brooklyn, the Sephardic Jewish Center on Ocean Parkway. A handful of Sephardic founders came together and say, it's our responsibility, we have to build it, and they did. So there is something about this tight-knit community that really opens its hand and heart to various causes.
That's correct. The same thing happened with our community center here in the Upper East Side. The same thing, the entire Sephardic community rallied to make sure that this building is built. It is the sense that the individual is really there to be part of a community. A community is a very strong institution for the Sephardim. It's not the individual. We do respect individual rights and privacy, of course, but however, we believe that the community is the way to identify each other, and it's the way to perpetuate the faith, the religion, and the community itself.
You look at the structure of the prayer book, so much of it obviously written in the plural, written with we, written with the community, the requirement of a minyan, right, of a quorum of 10 people for the service. Again, the emphasis on community, and I think sometimes in this world, given technology, it's easy to become more reclusive. It's easy to sit in front of your computer screen and not get involved with other individuals as much as face-to-face. Someone's told me about a synagogue that is completely online. The whole service is online. And I said, my God, just projecting, we're going to have Shiva calls. People are going to make visitation online. Right? We're going to go to weddings online. Where does it stop? And with Sephardim, and hopefully Ashkenazim follow the tradition as well, you need hand to hand. You'd have to hold and hug each other. People need that human warmth, and I think we're losing some of that.
Of course, the use of technology can be positive and negative, obviously. So maybe, of course, the Shiva, the wedding, the bar mitzvah celebration should be in person. Yet technology can allow the grandmother, the great-grandmother, the cousin who is living 5,000 miles away to be part of it. So if we take technology in the positive aspect, then we have even a greater community getting together even through through technological means, as long as the locals don't stay at home
Yeah,
and
yeah,
watch it via
yeah.
Skype or via
Yeah,
computer.
no, that's a very good point, because you find now with many funerals they're streaming.
That's correct.
And people who cannot, who would love to be there, but for extenuating
correct.
circumstances cannot
That's
attend, are able to become part of it. So you're right, it has that beneficial,
It has that beneficial
impact.
And if I could say, I think the experience of the Sephardic community is slightly different than the Ashkenazi community, in which our community never divided into denominational degree of observance of or faith. We don't have Reformed, Conservative, or Reconstructionist, or Orthodox or ultra-Orthodox groups in our community. We believe that we are one community with different degrees of observance, with different degrees of faith, possibly, yet we know we are all responsible for each other. And so in my synagogue, for example, you may have somebody sitting and praying who you might describe as ultra-Orthodox, sitting next to somebody who you might describe as he is Reconstructionist, for example, and yet they talk to each other, and their kids might marry each other, because they all believe that there is one community, there is one official tradition, and we all follow it. What we do privately in our homes, that's the privacy that we respect.
You know, we at the New York Board of Rabbis, and you're one of our officers, is when you walk in the door, obviously, in many cases, you're a member of a denomination, but we always say, leave your denomination at the door. You can wear it proudly, but when you walk into the room and you're sitting with other members of your people, recognize that we're not simply defined by denomination. There is a greater, the whole, in this case, is greater than the sum of its parts.
That is correct. I always use the pasuk, Kulanu bnei ish echad nahnu. We are all children of one father. And as the 12 tribes, there were 12 different tribes, but they recognize they are members of one family and there's one father to them.
I have listened to you speak over the years about a cause that doesn't get enough attention. Jews who fled Arab countries. And I know at the UN it's not politically correct to discuss it. We talk about Arab refugees. We don't talk about Jewish refugees. Let's
that
hear
is
more
correct.
About,
it is something, as a refugee myself,
right.
I feel that in my own bones. My parents were also refugees, and most of my community work or are considered refugees. It is something that the world, it's starting to recognize and acknowledge by our work that we have been doing at JJAC. And
JJAC?
Justice for Jews from Arab Countries, which I'm a co-president.
Right.
It is something, of course, that the United Nations and the rest of the world don't want to hear about. It is something that the Arab League and the Arab countries don't want to hear about. But the facts are facts, and that is we had almost 1 million Jewish refugees that had to either escape, were chased out, persecuted, some of them killed, all their properties taken by the governments of each individual Arab country at the heel of the establishment of the State of Israel. 1 million refugees, many of them left on their pajamas with one small suitcase, not even, it was more of a handbag where they had their small pertinence. And they were left to go anywhere in the world that they would accept them. Of course, Israel accepted the majority of them, and many other countries accepted the majority of them. But that we have the status, excuse me, the status of refugees, we certainly have that by United Nations High Commissioner of Refugees definition. We never heard of them. From all the resolutions at the United Nations and the Security Council, hundreds of resolutions on Palestinian refugees, none of them are on Jewish refugees.
I think it may have been you that said, we can talk about refugees as long as the Jewish refugee is on the table as well. Let's put all the refugees on the table, not just hear, you know, a very limited story.
That's exactly what we're working for. And we are not working to say, forget the so-called Palestinian refugees, not at all. We are saying there are two populations of refugees, and we want those two populations to be recognized at any political forum, at any negotiating table, at any official recognition of refugees in the Middle East. And that's what we achieved in Resolution 185 of the Congress of the United States. And that's what we achieved also in the Knesset law that was passed last year, marking November 30th as the Day of Refugees from Arab Countries.
You're a very proud advocate of the State of Israel. You've been to many marches, many demonstrations. You want to make sure that Israel is treated justly in the world of nations. look at what's happening today. Israel living in fear of a nuclear Iran, and not just a threat against Israel, because we've said many times it may start with Jews, it doesn't stop with Jews.
That's correct.
Hatred is not compartmentalized, and you find that the ideology in Iran, death to Israel, death to America, one comes with the other. You don't have one without the other.
That's correct.
I know we tend to be optimistic, but are you optimistic about what goes on today? I mean, it's very hard to be, when you pick up the papers, very hard to be an optimist.
It is very hard to be optimistic. You know, I keep on switching papers that I'm subscribed to because everyone I read, it just makes me unhappy about how they treat Israel. But as a man of faith, I have to be optimistic because I believe that God blessed us, that God is with us, that there's no other nation or other people in the world that has gone through so much pogroms, inquisitions, the Roman Empire, the Babylonian Empire, the Visigoth, the Holocaust, pogroms in Russia, the plagues and anything, and yet survived and was able to establish such a vibrant country that is considered the fourth or the fifth most strong country in the world. So I believe that God is on our side, and so I am optimistic. Of course, going through the details, it might be painful.
Yeah.
But yet, sometimes I ask myself, are we living in a world of lies, olam hasheker? Because at the official level, you see so many condemnations of Israel, from Europe, from South America, from everywhere in the world. Of course,
that's where it's
Arab
united.
leagues.
That's where the nations are united.
They're united,
right,
exactly. Right. And yet, if you really look deep down, most of these countries have great economic ties with Israel, have great research ties with Israel, technology. It's like I feel that there are like two levels. There is the official level, which is, I call it olam hasheker, the world of lies, and yet there is an unofficial level where the relationship with Israel are really, really great. From all of those countries that condemn Israel, even from the enemies of Israel. And the Arab League and Arab base in many of those countries, I know, do have certain relationship with Israel. And yet you ask yourself, where are we living? What kind of a world are we living in?
I met recently, I don't know if you had a chance as well to hear him, a doctor who fled Syria with the attacks taking place there. And he said one of the first groups that came to our aid were Israelis. He said, I grew up in a home and I grew up in a country where I was taught to hate the Jews, hate the Israelis. And here they were saving our lives. And he has undergone this transformation. Now he's a great spokesperson upon the real Israel, not the one that is distorted.
We had the pleasure of hosting him in our synagogue, together with his Israeli counterpart. And we did hear the story. And it's unfortunate that Arab leaders have not taught their population, if not to love Israel, but to leave Israel in peace. Having lived in an Arab country, we have neighbors. And of course, many of them were suspicious that we might be Zionist, but we had great friendship with them. We sat with them and we heard the same songs and we danced the same music and we ate together. And yet their leadership always instills in them hatred toward Israel and towards the Jews. I believe that is used strictly for personal gain of that leader, to maintain his dictatorship, his tyranny, his power, his hold on his people. Scapegoat is Israel and the Jews. But deep down, if they would teach the population to love Israel and the Jews, things would have been a much better place.
Before we let you go, I just want to ask you this question. Being a doctor and a rabbi, does that enhance, as a doctor in particular, your appreciation of a supernatural power when you see some of the miracles of the world, childbirth, right? Do you say, my God, there's something here that I can't fully comprehend, but it is miraculous? On the other hand, you also see sadness, you see tragedy in life.
I'll tell you, when I wanted to study as a doctor, many told me, oh, that's going to take you out of your faith. And on a daily basis, as I studied medicine, that strengthened my faith more and more. And yes, everything that happens, I see it as a miracle, that it is against all odds. The formation of a child, the birth of a child is against all scientific odds that that child will be born normal, natural, and healthy. And yet it happens. That definitely strengthened my faith. There's no question in my mind that in every aspect of medicine, the hand of God is there.
Well, I just want to say that we at the New York Board of Rabbis, I in particular, we're blessed to have you as a member of our community because you bring so much. You're always there for others. You're a great rabbi and a great doctor, although I prefer to be in your presence when you're a rabbi, not as a doctor, but if I need a doctor, you're the one I want to go to.
Thank you
All right,
very
thanks
much.
so much.
It was my pleasure to
Always
serve
great being with you. Thank
and
you.
to be with you.
Thank you. Remember, we may have different faiths, we may have different faces, but above all, we must see each other as members of one human family. A great Jewish sage said, if you believe it can be broken, then know it can also be fixed. When we speak faith to faith, we know we can find the right way to fix the problems of our world. Thank you for watching Faith to Faith, the place that leads to greater understanding. The New York Board of Rabbis would like to thank Marilyn and Marty Metz for their generous support. Thank you for watching Faith to Faith on JBS.
We would be pleased to send a complimentary DVD of this program to anyone who wishes to support JBS, the Jewish Broadcasting Service, with a tax-deductible gift of $36, double chai or more, to the nonprofit organization Jewish Education in Media. Simply visit the JBS homepage and click on the Donate button to make a donation by PayPal or your credit card. And please indicate the program for which you would like a DVD. Or you can send your tax-deductible check made out to Jem, Post Office Box 180, Riverdale Station, Bronx, New York 10471. And again, please remember to indicate which program you would like to receive with our compliments. And we thank you for your kind support.